The Secrets of Middle-earth is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth. Hi everyone, you're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we discuss the hidden themes and deeper layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether in his writings or in any of the media derived from them. Today, we're discussing The Rings of Power, Episode 4, The Great Wave. I'm Thomas Sanjurjo, and joining me today are Thomas Salerno. Hi, Thomas.
Hey there.
Kaitlyn Facista. Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing well. And Jeff Haecker. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Thomas.
All right, so be sure to follow The Secrets of Middle-earth in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast app or directory you subscribe to. And find us on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia or on Twitter, where you can at SQPN or Instagram at StarQuest Network. We do get feedback. We've actually gotten a lot of feedback about this show on a regular basis, so that's really cool. We love that you guys are listening and getting back in touch with us. We got some feedback from Facebook. Samuel Peter K on Facebook says, I thought the latest episode was really good, talking about the show. Not us, but the actual show. He thought the latest episode was really good, and I'm really excited for how the series will progress, but I'm not that much of a Tolkien lore master. And he asks the question, how do you think they're handling the impending fall of Numenor so far? Also, I thought the conversation between Elrond and Durin about their fathers was spot on Tolkien. So we'll talk about that from this episode as we get into it. But what do you guys think? How do you feel about the way they're handling the fall of Numenor so far?
I'm definitely satisfied with it. Like, so far, I can see how they're setting things up that's going to be different from the telling in the Silmarillion, but still familiar enough that, you know, I can kind of see the plot beats. And I'm actually interested to see how they kind of tell the same story, but in a different way. That's been really intriguing to me.
I feel like I feel pretty much the same way. I'm excited to see how they are going to present their version of the fall of Numenor. We know it's not going to be exactly like in the Silmarillion, so it is a little bit exciting since we don't know what's going to happen exactly. I thought this episode was really interesting, the way that they kind of came out with Muriel's dream and all of this foreshadowing. I was kind of wondering if they were going to keep maybe people who aren't as familiar with the lore guessing for longer, maybe I was just surprised that they revealed it so soon as foreshadowing, but it was still, I think it was really cool.
I have some theories about that though, too. I think as we get into the episode, we'll talk a little more about, you know, what the dream means and how it's unfolding. So,
nice.
Jeff, you feel like they're handling it pretty well?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I noticed in this one, like, Farazan didn't seem to be as bad as we know he's probably going to be. It seemed like he was behind the queen, regent, whatever she was doing. So it'll kind of be interesting to see how he falls further. And the whole political aspect of this one was interesting and, you know, kind of rabble rousing against the elves. So you see that he's got that, you know, darkness or that anti-elvish whatever in already going, but he still wasn't going directly against the queen regent, which we know he probably will later. So I think it's they're giving him a place to kind of start, and I think we'll see it's both good characters and bad characters to kind of see how they progress. So I think it's interesting. But when the opening scene, when you see the big wave, I think my jaw was on the floor for a couple minutes because it just looked so good and so intense. And I was like, oh my gosh, are they really doing something now? But just for a second, I figured, okay, we're it's episode, 5. Let's go ahead and just finish that off and move on. But no, it was good. I'm very interested to see kind of how they, progress moving forward. Especially with our characters that we know, like Isildur and Elendil and the others. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's another one. What's happening with them is a really interesting topic to start discussing too. So We'll get there. We had another comment from previous to watching this episode. It seems like James Swanson on YouTube was talking a lot about the stuff that we were talking about last week. But one of the really good points that I wanted to bring out from their comment was, have the Harfoots ever left anyone behind? It's a question that he asks. Maybe this is just how they speak about those who have been lost. Maybe this is just a mindset that keeps everyone in line, but it's never really enforced. For example, when Nori is threatened with being decaravaned, Sadak intervenes and says she's young and can continue, but in last place. So it's like a light threat that keeps everybody in line, but not really intended to actually leave them behind. He thinks that we'll see the possibility that if they do end up falling behind, the others will come to their aid, the no one walks alone part. And then also thinks that the star charts may be to help them in the migration so they don't get lost, and asks the question, maybe how often do they migrate? Maybe not annually, but maybe much less frequently. And so I'd like to see more about those star charts personally. I think that's got some more story perspective to it there. And then one last one, Paul Leon on YouTube comments about our last episode, that it was another good episode by this SOME gang. Since you kindly quoted my pre-show thoughts, I'm happy to say that my hesitations about the show have been largely set aside after the first 3 episodes. As you said in this last episode, viewing it as based on the works of Tolkien instead of a pure adaptation helps a lot. And my main issues with the first 2 episodes, too much going on with too many people and Arondir's actor not showing any emotion, have both gone away with episode 3. I love what we saw of Numenor. They absolutely nailed it. Can't wait for the next episode of the show and the next episode of the podcast too. So thank you, Paul. We appreciate you listening and keeping up with us. And definitely, if you have a comment or a question, or would like for us to answer a question that you have about the show, we'd be more than happy to attempt it. But as we get into some of the things today, not everything has answers, even from very deeply knowledgeable Tolkien lore masters, which I think amongst the group of us, we can probably claim that. So we can go ahead and dive in. I think, we started talking about the opening scene, because that, I think, is a really intense scene that sort of starts this episode. And this episode is called The Great Wave. And it opens with the scene of Muriel blessing the babies of Numenor. So all of the women of Numenor have brought their babies. They're bringing them to be blessed by the queen. She's carrying them and blessing them. And then the tree begins to drop petals, and she turns around and sees water begin flooding into the island. And so, Jeff, you mentioned that you were surprised to see it as if this was happening for real too early. And I was like, this has to be a dream. There's no way they're going to go this. There's no way they're going to change this much of the lore. That's a little much.
They really got me though with that. I was like, wait, no, really? So soon? Like they really got me. And then when it was a dream, I was like, oh, okay, right. I forgot about how that's kind of a common technique in storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it fooled me for very long, but it was for a couple of seconds. I was like, oh my gosh, this is happening.
Right. Yeah.
So I was very, but it's kind of, foreshadowing for what's probably going to happen at the end of season 4, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they had me all the way up to the point where it started actually pulling the terrace out from under her, and then I was like, this has to be a dream. There's no way that, because I was like, maybe it's just like, rumblings of what's going to happen, right? And like there's some disaster that strikes, and then they blame the elves and goes on. But then when it finally like actually destroyed the actual terrace out from under her, I was like, okay, no, this has got to be a dream.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought like, oh, okay, so the island is starting to rumble or something. We're kind of having like pre-shocks, almost like, instead of like aftershocks. But then as soon as I saw the wave, I'm like, okay, dream sequence.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, because there isn't a warning. And I think that's the really intense thing about this, is that the destruction of Numenor is very sudden, and it happens because there really is no other recourse to deal with them. And that, in the lore, that's sort of the way it goes, is that the Valar are just finally so fed up and can't do anything to actually fix the situation, and the just hubris that has come to be what Numenor is, that they throw their hands up essentially and say, okay, Iluvatar, it's yours. Just take care of this. And that's when the destruction happens, and it's very quick and very complete. And I like that they're toying with that idea and kind of fooling us, even those of us who know what's going on, into like being comfortable with the fact that, well, maybe there were things that happened before. It's like, nope. They saw this coming, but they did not see this coming the way that it does end up happening.
Mm-hmm. I'm very intrigued by the way that Iluvatar does step in and act in this moment with the destruction of Numenor, and I'm really excited to see how they present that. I'm assuming they will, but it'll be very interesting.
And then it just to kind of contrast what Numenor does, we heard from Elrond what Arendelle did, which he essentially did the same thing, but his intention was for the good of others. He basically thought he was just going to give up his life to request the aid of the Valar, and they ended up honoring him and, as we know, getting a flying ship, which is pretty cool. So so it's kind of the opposite of what the Numenorians were doing, who were trying to take, whereas Arendelle was trying to give and trying to plead for aid. So
yeah, and I like that they're bringing all of these contrasts in very clever storytelling methods too. I thought that, like, for anyone who doesn't know that Elrond is the son of Arendelle and what Arendelle did, it's presented to you, but without just like here is some more lore, but like this is actually something meaningful to him, and it fits the context of the situation of talking about living up to a father that's like, oh, I'm so frustrated with this guy. How do I even deal with him? And it was very heartfelt, that scene between Elrond and Durin. It was really just built really well and felt right. And like one of the commenters said, it felt very Tolkien.
I'm surprised, and we might get into this later too, of how many fathers and father figures we've seen just in this episode. Like I counted, okay, we have Elendil, we have Muriel's father, Tar Palantir, the king. We have Pharazôn, who it's revealed he has a son in this episode. We have Durin III. Eärendil is mentioned. And then we have the villain, Adar, which means father. He's like the father figure to the orcs. So we have this whole motif of fatherhood running through the whole episode, and I assume through the rest of the series as well. That's going to be very interesting to see all those father figures, or at least their storylines, kind of converge as we get closer to the finale.
Yeah, I think last week I mentioned that I had seen that theme, and then of course this past weekend, just to tie it back to our faith, it was prodigal son, the parable, the prodigal son in our Sunday reading. So it's very, but I noticed that too, Thomas. The fatherhood is continuing, and we didn't see them this week, but the Harfoots, Sadok's kind of the father of the tribe and Nori's father. So definitely lots of fathers going on. And so it'll be very interesting to see how that theme kind of plays out over the rest of this season in the series.
We also see it kind of lacking in Theo's own life too, whereas there's such an emphasis on fatherhood for everyone else, and he doesn't have his. He's kind of on his own to try and figure everything out. And then he also has Arondir coming in as like his wannabe stepfather that he doesn't really seem to like, but maybe he likes him a little bit more after this episode.
Yeah. Well, and then you also have, Waldreg, the innkeeper, who is maybe trying to step into that role too. So in the absence of a father, we have these potentials for good or bad influences on this son who's left without. And Halbrand too is a fatherless figure, and he's mentioned the fact that he essentially picked up this sigil off of a dead man, and that's the way he refers to his father. Whereas we have these other sons that are very have admiration for their fathers, and he obviously doesn't. He just considers it a waste, sort of. And I think we're going to see more of that character develop as we go along. And I'm interested to see where we, kind of where we end up with him. And so, in the show, we see also we're introduced to Farazan and his son, and in a very interesting way that we have this kind of riling up of the crowd and very political sounding, oddly reminiscent of things that are happening in our actual news today, with all of this kind of anti-immigrant sort of sense of things. And, the elf has come in to take our jobs, and they'll, outlive us. And, so all this kind of stuff is really intriguing. The one thing I thought was really funny about this scene was that in the end, Farazan steps in and does a really good job of kind of calming the crowd. As you were saying, Jeff, that he's very likable. Like, we see him step into this role, and it's hard not to appreciate what he does, where he just kind of splits that middle ground of not really disagreeing with what they're saying, but at the same time not putting the problem on the queen, and more as, let's refocus on the elves being the problem, not the queen being the problem. And then he buys them off the same way that Halbrand did, where he's like, a round of drinks for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that whole thing was a setup, because like the guy who's doing the rabble rousing, I've seen him in previous episodes with Farazan. So I'm like, oh, did Farazan send this guy to kind of gin up these crowds with this rhetoric so that he can come in, Farazan, the reasonable politician, and give this great speech and, get on the side of the people? So I was just thinking, I'm like, this to me, it was showing Farazan's kind of deviousness that I'm sure we'll see play out later.
I was going to say the same thing. I think that he is orchestrating this, and he's kind of digging into the unrest and attempting to use it for his advantage, because he doesn't say, trust in the queen, she's going to take care of us. He says, trust in me. And you can see that he's trying to kind of worm his way into the hearts of the people, even if he may not be the official ruler. He wants to be the ruler that's kind of calling the shots. And that was kind of like the way that his son was talking about him. There's not someone he doesn't owe a favor to, or someone who doesn't know his name, or he doesn't know their name. Like, he's definitely working his way up.
Like, it's that statement, by these callous hands, right? When he says, by these callous hands, I'll hold us, or there will not be an elf to lead us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was interesting too, how you see that he's got all these guild crests. So unless he kind of, got them by buying them or whatever, but it doesn't seem like that's, at least from the little bit we saw of these smiths, that you have to earn it. So it seems like he really is kind of a man of the people. He's earned these crests and whatever. I didn't look too closely at them. I'm sure someone online has kind of analyzed them to the no get out, but you can see that he's a man of, he has some talents out, and has kind of presumably used those to kind of curry favor with everybody, with all these guilds that are, kind of the backbone of, probably like the ruling class, or the kind of the second class of Numenor. So I'm curious to see kind of if we learn more about him, or get a Farazan flashback episode or something like that, just to kind of see his origins, and maybe he had an ancestor killed by an elf or something, and he's taken it to has held a grudge for however long. So
yeah, I have to say one thing too about this show. There are so many just beautiful gems of quotes that they are scattering throughout that are really good. And this one, when his son meets him and is ribbing him for, doing statecraft while he's there doing, kind of merchant transactions, he responds to him and says, statecraft is the art of attending to small matters as diligently as grand ones. And that's just a really good quote that encapsulates kind of what he's about, but is such a great concept of that, you can do no great things, but only small things with great love. It's kind of turning it on its head and doing it for an ambitious purpose when you talk about it in this sense, but the intention is the same, right? Is to do small things as if they were big things, and that makes all the difference. So we move from there to a scene where Galadriel is presenting what she has discovered to the queen, and they're still at odds, the two of them. They are still butting heads about this, and the queen does not want to offer help, and we still aren't sure why at this point. The argument's kind of interesting, and it does end up with Galadriel in jail. It's funny because when she turns around, she's like, there is a tempest in me. And I'm like, yeah, but it's just you. You're not gonna, you can't take on the entire kingdom of Numenor by yourself, Galadriel. Come on.
I feel like they're really trying to connect her to Feanor, even though she's not a descendant of Feanor. They are from the same group of elves. So I feel like they're trying to maybe go very far with that comparison.
Yeah, she definitely has that Feanorian barely contained rage mode throughout. Like, basically, like, I'm a bit frustrated almost because I'm like, I feel like that's been her one character note through like the whole show is just barely contained rage most of the time. And I'm hoping we'll kind of see some more, nuance with this character going forward.
She'll tell us the secret that she's always angry and turn big and green.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see that. And I think I'm liking actually the way that they're pushing this, because they're telling us this is a different Galadriel than the Galadriel we see in the actual Lord of the Rings movies. And something has to happen because there is so much rage about her towards Sauron that she wouldn't have just settled down and been content that he was dead after the last alliance, right? She would have, this kind of thing would have carried on unless something happens that truly alters her and the way that she sees the world and what she sees her role in the world as. So I'm intrigued to see where they're going to work that through this whole narrative.
She definitely seems like she's learning, but I think it's very... I just hope that Halbrand is not supposed to be Sauron, because she's learning from Halbrand. Like, he's kind of walking her through, like, this is how you should be approaching things. And he's trying to temper her and trying to teach her how to be a little bit more tactful. And I think if what everyone thinks, if everyone thinks he's Sauron, if that turns out to be true, I just think that would be so weird for her to have learned from him. And I really don't like that. So I'm still really hopeful that he's not supposed to be Sauron.
He says a very Sauron type line, though. He says, he tells Galadriel, identify what it is your opponent most fears. Give them a means of mastering it so that you can master them. And I'm like, isn't that basically Sauron's MO? Especially when he's in Numenor. He tricks the Numenor. He's like, okay, you fear death more than anything else. Well, I'm going to give you a means to master it. Go and seize everlasting life from the Valar. And in that way, he masters them. So in that moment, my eyes narrowed and I'm like, are you Sauron? Like, I started to suspect for a moment, but that could just be a red herring on the part of the writers. I don't know.
They definitely want us to think that he's Sauron. And that's the unsettling thing about it. He's extremely suspicious, especially as he was advising Farazone later in the episode. Yeah. Like, it was so in your face that it makes me think hopefully it can't be true, because this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm just from a production standpoint, I don't think he's Sauron, just because you're trying to introduce new people to the show and get as many eyes as you can. So if they're switching actors all of a sudden for the same, they're saying, okay, because, well, maybe not switch actors, but I think if we see Sauron, he'll be more, at least from the text, he's more elvish in appearance, and he'll be working, with Celebrimbor at some point, probably. So I think just from a production standpoint, we're not going to see Halbrand is not Sauron, just because he's not. They would have to probably change actors, and I think that might be, you might lose some people there. So I think just from the practical side he's not, but anything is absolutely possible. He's definitely, there's more to him than we've been told, and I'm hopeful we get to kind of see more of his journey to where he is, because kind of in contrast to some of the characters from the Legendarium like Baron or some of these other men who were kind of in the wilderness for a while and were kind of found their way to the elves eventually. So it'll be interesting to see. He could be Sauron for all we know, but I'm suspecting he's not, but he's definitely, he knows more than he's let on. There's more to him that we haven't seen. So
yeah. And I think, I don't know, I still like the theory that he is the leader of the lost band that Aragorn summons to the final battle.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
That's me, because we're getting. I feel like we're getting a huge redemption arc for him, only for him to fall short right at the end, and that to me is like, oh, that would be such great storytelling.
Yeah,
I'll be devastated, but it'll be like it'll be devastating in a good way.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Where you've really come to care about this character and then he just doesn't take the final step. No.
Yeah. And it's almost worse than someone like directly choosing evil. It's they're so close to choosing good and then they just fall short. Like that's such a great storytelling way to go about things. And I also feel like, it kind of happens a lot with Tolkien characters. So
right.
Yeah.
I could definitely see that.
Sorry, I saw this earlier and I pulled it up again, but there's someone on Reddit put a picture of Galadriel saying his people are scattered, leaderless, next to a picture of Gandalf saying they're scattered, divided, leaderless. There is one who could unite them. So I was like, oh, very, yeah. So we'll see. I don't know. Yeah, I think I like the theory that he's the not king under the mountain, but the king of
the dead men,
the Dunhill.
Yeah.
I think is yeah.
Yeah, and we haven't gotten a name for the people that they're referred to variously as these people of this land, right? So it's the Southlanders. So it's like kind of just this generic, and everything else has a name. So it's interesting that they haven't gotten a name. We haven't gotten a name for them yet. So we'll see how that comes through.
Yeah.
We get
how do
another
you
scene
guys?
go ahead.
I was gonna say, how do you guys feel about the way that they keep including so many nods to the Peter Jackson movies in their dialogue? It almost feels like the show is more based on the movies than it is the books, because it's just like line after line after line that you're like, oh, this sounds vaguely familiar. Oh, that's because it's almost taken directly from the movies. And I feel like at this point, to me, it almost feels like it's getting a little bit old. But I don't know how everyone else feels.
I'm okay with it, but I know that they're probably thinking, well, more people have seen those movies than have read the book. I mean, I was just talking to two people at my parish this weekend who were like, yeah, we've been watching the show. We haven't read the books, though. And I'm like, so like, I think they know that that's a thing. So they want to incorporate elements that will be familiar for people who have at least seen the first couple of Peter Jackson movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I haven't
fair.
watched the movies as much. I've seen the movies maybe 2 or 3 times, and it's not that I don't like them. It's just that they're incredibly long, and I would rather just sit down and read the book, honestly, if I was going to go for one of the two. So it's not catching me out quite that much, where I'm recognizing the lines coming from them. I do like the feel of the way that they have everyone speaking, and especially later on, there's the moment where they've just gotten done talking about the really deep stuff with Durin, and they need a lighter beat to catch us out. And so they do a gag with the trolls thing. And I really loved that scene because it caught me off guard in the sense that it was funny, but it was funny in Lord of the Rings way, not in a slapstick or Marvel kind of way where it takes us out of the lore to give us this humorous moment. But it really did catch, it kept telling the story, advancing the lore, but then also gave us this beat of like, okay, we just got this really serious stuff. We got some more really serious stuff coming up. Let's give a laugh in here in the middle.
I think it's because they just let the characters be themselves. They didn't try to have the characters like the joke seemed organic, I think is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And I like that they're doing that. I like they're going that direction with stuff. I thought, we talked a lot about fathers, and I thought the really interesting take here on Isildur, that his friends, when they get kicked off of the ship, they are talking, they're getting upset with him about it. And one of the things they bring up is the fact that he was always mewling about his mother, that his mother was gone. And that's what starts the fight, the real actual fist fight between them. And so this is the first real mention we've had of a mother figure in the series, I think, unless anybody else has caught another one. I think Bronwyn excluded, obviously.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. And that seems to be, something that's driving Isildur to be who he is, which is really interesting because that's a character that we know a lot about, but we don't know anything about.
Well, speaking of his mother, I think now that we've heard this feminine voice calling to him twice, I almost wonder if that's meant to be his mother's voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had the same thought.
See, this is probably an outside, probably not true, but I kind of almost thought, is it Luthien's voice? Because Luthien is his, one of his ancestors. So I almost wondered if maybe it's because I could be wrong, but I believe she was, whether real or imagined, some sort of in the halls of Mandos voice or something. I had that thought too, that maybe it's Luthien or some, voice from one of his ancestors. So
that would be interesting.
And it's calling him to the west. So I don't know. I'm intrigued. I'd like to know more about his brother too, and what's going on with his brother, and why his brother has been calling him away.
Yeah, they've mentioned him a few times now, but we really don't know anything more about him.
I wonder if we'll see him in season 2.
Yeah, because I don't think they've made any casting announcements about him, at least for this season.
No, I don't think so. And I imagine that they'll want to hype things up again for season 2. So they will probably do a similar character poster reveal like they did for season 1. And we'll probably get like 20 new people.
Now that you're ready with all of these other guys and you can actually pronounce their name. That's my wife keeps saying, we need like a Facebook of all of these people,
Yeah, because we just have their hands in their posters.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think, didn't they say that he was, that Anarion had gone west back to the, those crazy Westerners and their elvish ways. So it almost seems like there's some kind of underground elvish, elf friend type of movement going on that Anarion is, that maybe Elendil was kind of a part of in his youth, but kind of became just kind of your what's expected of a Numenorian noble, be a captain of a ship. And whereas Anarion was kind of more stuck to those ways. So, but yeah, I'm very curious to learn more about them and see if maybe Anarion joins the ship, whether we see him this season or next or whenever.
That'd be good. So then we get this scene where we finally see Adar, the father figure of the orcs, and it's Arondir it's chained down, and Adar comes out and has this very interesting almost mercy or compassion killing of this fatally wounded orc. And rather than being violent about it, he seems to be genuinely upset that he's having to put this orc down. And I was intrigued at that because it shows a very different character for even an elf who has fallen and is living amongst the orcs. I wouldn't expect them to be compassionate towards the orcs themselves. So how did you guys feel about this whole scene?
I thought he was going to heal him at first. The way he was putting his hands on him. I'm like, oh, is he going to use magic to heal this guy? I'm like, oh, wait, no, he killed him.
He just seemed very tender and compassionate towards them. And it makes sense why they seem to be so devoted to him, because he really does seem to actually, I don't know if you could say love, because this is such a kind of messed up society that they've created, but he cares for them in a fatherly way. So when you see him taking care of the orc and kind of doing what needs to be done because he can see that he is fatally wounded. He doesn't want him to suffer anymore. So he does what needs to be done in that situation. But you can see how he's so pained to do it. And then afterwards they have kind of like this ritual. I'm assuming they're going to go bury him or do whatever orcs do with their bodies. But it was really surprising, and I thought it was really cool to see this aspect of like orc culture and ritual.
Yeah, I was gonna say, agreeing with Thomas, I thought it was going to be some kind of healing, that he was going to heal him and bring him back. So I guess my initial read of the scene was that he was the orc thought he was going to be healed, and then Adar just killed him. So I almost took it the opposite way, that it wasn't a mercy, that it was maybe the orc thought he was going to be healed, and Adar's did the opposite. But I think it's probably the more of the mercy makes more sense now that you're saying that. But I initially thought that. So I'm and seeing Adar, I think one of y'all said that he was potentially one of the thralls of Morgoth from millennia ago, because he definitely looks like an elf, but definitely not. He's kind of corrupted and pale skin and scarred and looking like he's aging. So yeah, I'm curious to see if it seems like he's not a Maiar or anything like that, but he potentially could be, and just taking on the appearance of an elf, like a certain character we've been talking about. So
yeah. Well, and he says some interesting things. So again, we get this: is this Sauron? Is it where it's he says I'm not a god yet, right? And then he also mentions about the needing to recreate the world to undo some of the lies that that Arondir has been told. That even the rocks believe it at this point, and we'd have to recreate the world to untangle it. So yeah, it's interesting where they're going with this character, and I'm still holding out. I don't think we've seen him yet. I don't think we've seen Sauron yet. You're still waiting for that character.
Yeah.
I've heard an interesting theory that he's the first age elf Maglor, one of Feanor's sons, because I think he's the only son of Feanor who we don't have a definitive like either death or that he goes to Valinor ending for him. And if I remember correctly, Maglor, one of his hands is burned by one of the Silmarils. And Adar, one of his hands has a gloved gauntlet, but only one hand. And so when I heard this theory, I'm like, maybe he is Maglor, but that would be kind of a deep cut for them to do. I mean, but they've done such a good job of explaining the lore to new viewers so far that I wouldn't be too surprised if they went that route.
And I saw something too for him is his neck armor, like the chest plate that he had on, was a similar motif to Gil-galad's. And he was talking about the river. So definitely seeming like he's, and I was, quick earlier today, I was like, okay, trying to like, who could he be? Did Gil-galad have another brother or a cousin or something like that? But, so it seems like he's definitely, is from that people, from the Noldor.
So I thought it was interesting because they talk about Baleriand very specifically here. So I was wondering if he might be the I'm lost on his name right now, the elf that betrays Baleriand to Morgoth.
Myclan?
Yeah.
That one I'm less likely to buy because he's supposed to have fallen to his death.
Yeah.
And his death was like something that was prophesied by his father. When his father is dying, he's like, and you will die the same death as me. And then the same kind of casting from the walls happens. So I'm more likely, I'm actually kind of into the Maglor theory because of the way Adar was talking about how he walked along the river for a really long time or whatever he said. And with Maglor, he casts the Silmaril into the sea after it burns him unbearably, and then he kind of just wanders along the shores lamenting. So kind of this similar walking along shores thing is going on. So maybe it could be him, but I'm also kind of thinking it's probably just someone they invented for the show.
Could be. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they have earned the right to do that because they've already done a really good job with Halbrand and getting us to ask good quesquests about him. So,
Right.
yeah, I trust where they're moving with things at this point. And while I wouldn't mind to see more of the Legendarium brought in for sure, I don't mind them expanding it out at this point either. I think they're doing a really good job with it. And as an example of that, the chant that the orcs perform here at the death rites of this other orc, we don't know what it means. And so you get the general sense that it's like grieving for him, but there's no translation. So if you go and look it up on any of the elf dictionaries that are out there, there's not really a direct anything. And so, Thomas, I know you had read somewhere that one of the actors had this sort of statement about the phrase that they're using.
Yeah. I remember watching a video where, and I'm blanking on the actor's name. But he's played a lot of orcs, both in the Peter Jackson movies, and he plays an orc in this.
I think it was Jed Brophy, right?
Thank you. Yeah, it was Jed Brophy. Yeah. He said that it basically has the sense of rest in peace, but that's not a literal translation.
Yeah, and I have not verified this all the way through, but I read something on Reddit where they were looking at some of the other times that Black speech has been used, and Nam is apparently the name of Mandos for the Black speech. And so if you take that sort of if you take that context, what they might be saying is something about going to the halls of Mandos. And then if you mush some of the other stuff, you might get the word fear in Black speech in there. And what they were postulating is that it's perhaps bring fear to Mandos. And that's what they're saying in the Black speech, which fits in a very interesting way.
Yeah.
So I'd love to believe it. I have not looked at it all the way through, but it seemed like a pretty convincing argument to me.
Yeah, orc traditions about the afterlife would be an interesting road to explore. Yeah,
that would be really cool if they gave us any kind of information about that.
I hope they do, because they seem to be aware enough of the import of all the things that they're pulling in. So I'm intrigued to see them continue with this kind of thing. So we get a little, we don't have anything about the Harfoots this week. And instead we go back to getting some stuff about the men, the Bronwyn and Theo. And we see that Theo is willing to go back into the town to make essentially a food run for getting some stuff for the people in the tower. And Bronwyn's not super thrilled about it, but in this scene we have finally the confirmation that the orcs have indeed been searching for the hilt, and that once one of the orcs sees it, now we know this is the thing that they have been looking for with all of their digging.
This kind of does it. I don't know I think we talked about this before, but it does kind of give me a Harry Potter kind of vibe. Like this is some kind of a Horcrux that they need in order to bring, to summon Sauron or something like that. So I'm kind of intrigued about why is this so important? Kind of what's the deal here?
So I was curious about this. So this could be me just projecting onto it, but Theo could understand the orcs in the village. And I almost wondered if maybe we're meant to believe the orcs are speaking the Black speech, but the hilt is translating for him. Kind of like the One Ring translated, spider speech. And I believe it translated, when the ring race were attacking the Fellowship, they understood, or Frodo could understand them through the ring when he was wearing it. So I'm almost wondering if this is kind of the same thing, leading me to think, and if it is, leading me to kind of think maybe the hilt is something Sauron crafted, and if it has that similar property. It's kind of a something I always notice is when people of a certain culture in any kind of film are speaking, English or the common tongue or whatever it is, I'm like, shouldn't they be speaking their own language? So I almost wonder if that might be the case here. If we're meant to, because you do see them speaking, common tongue to Arondir and others, but among themselves, they most likely would be speaking their own language. So maybe it's just my headcanon for right now, but I'm curious to see if that, the hilt is kind of a an early attempt by Sauron at crafting and smithing, that he'll, we'll see more later on, of course, when he's forging the ring. But
and the sword hilt does have the mark that Sauron made on it, so it's definitely something of his.
Yeah, and we do have precedent for that translation issue, because just previous to this, we saw Arondir, who doesn't know the black speech, we can assume, or at least not enough of it, in the presence of the orcs. He doesn't know what's happening when the orcs are speaking. We hear only the orcish speech, but then we do hear the Quenya when Adar turns around to speak to him, only briefly, and then it comes back into to common speech. And I think that's kind of the indication that Adar has gone from speaking to the orcs to speaking to him, and we know that he's now speaking elf. So I think they're trying to signal that to us in this scene. That's
really interesting.
Yeah, and then with the hilt too, it was because it was the old man. It was his hilt. He had it in his barn, and Theo found it. Was that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if, now we're seeing an even bigger connection. He's potentially, a follower of Sauron, or, his ancestors were followers of Morgoth. So very interesting to see if, where this leads us, and, how it seems like it's not going to be good for Theo, but hopefully,
almost like a cult of Sauron going on.
Yeah.
Which, the cult of Morgoth is what happens on Numenor. So,
Right.
Did anybody catch that guy's name, by the way? It went too fast on the... Yeah.
Waldreg.
Oh, okay. Because it's funny. I kept calling him in my head Billy Bones, because he reminds me of the pirate from Treasure Island, because he kind of talks like a pirate and he looks like a pirate. So I'm like, okay, you're Billy Bones until I learn what your actual name is.
And then he throws rum at the kid.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
He's interested in treasure.
Well, and he's like the butcher and the innkeeper, but he's also kind of like the town crazy old man. But yet he still is like the source of. I kind of acts like he's the mayor of the town too. And I thought, like, what is this guy? He was. Yeah. It's just a really bizarre character that it's also very entertaining to see. Like, he's just kind of everything, I guess.
Yeah. When the actor's doing a really good job with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then going back to the first, I can't remember if it was the first or the second, but when Bronwyn props the head up, throws the head at him. So he must have, if he's some kind of, cult of Morgoth, cult of Sauron, whatever, what would he have thought when he saw the head of the orc? He's like, oh, this is a sign that it's time to, to enact the master plan of bring our god back, our, Sauron, or maybe he thinks Morgoth more than Sauron, but
yeah, be interesting to see.
He also mentioned something about a beautiful servant too, and that's supposed to be Sauron.
Mm-hmm. So we get this, we go back to the building of the tower, and we get some more of the story of the dwarves, which I love this whole scene, this whole segment leading up to the interaction where we find out the thing that was in the box was actually Mithril, and the naming of it, that was so cool that Elrond was there and he named Mithril basically, which is very neat. And we hear that Durin, the elder, is not interested in mining it because it is in an old mine below the Miramur, so it's a dangerous mining, dangerous potential area to be mining. And then we do actually see that's the case as it falls out. But I love it. And then the one thing that I caught the second watch through that I thought was really clever and very great, the secret knock that gets him into the door is the kids' song.
Yeah.
It's the song that the children were singing. I didn't catch it the first time.
Darndest things, like
Which makes sense when you go back and watch it again, and Disa is like yelling at the kids, like, "Shut up, stop it!" like okay, that's why they shouldn't be. You shouldn't teach your kids your secret password.
Yep. And it still holds true today. You know, just don't let your kids know the passwords to your computers, to your Wi-Fi.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Or like they're always listening, you know, like be careful what you say around them. They'll repeat it.
Yeah. So I thought that was very clever. That whole scene was very well done. And then we see that the friendship between the greed of the dwarves is not so great that it will ruin the friendship that Durin has with Elrond, Durin the Fourth has with Elrond. And so that's, I thought it was nice to have this scene wrap up the way it did and not make them even more at odds with each other. And especially when it comes back to Disa and her feeling like, you know, Durin would have been in that cave if Elrond hadn't have gone to talk with him. So that was really
and so this one made me think of, I wonder if there's kind of some shifting timelines that we're maybe not aware of, because it seems like the Numenor stuff is happening in real time, but this episode when we see the tower in is it Lindon where they're building the tower?
Aragion, I think.
Okay. Yeah, we see that pretty well far along, and then Elrond says something like, you know, I didn't want to wait 20 years before coming back. So I'm almost wondering if this is kind of if not saying that there's going to be like is taking place in an entirely different age, but maybe this timeline is kind of accelerated a little bit the Durin Elrond part is kind of happening a little, you know, more time is passing there, and then it'll eventually catch up maybe when Numenor is traveling to Middle Earth. Because I don't know that we know how long that journey is yet, but you know, maybe there's just some shifting timelines going on there. I don't know if that means anything, but just something I noticed on this.
I did think that was a little bit confusing and a little bit odd that they have made so much progress on the tower, and yet Galadriel really hasn't been in Numenor that long. Like, really, the longest that this could have been is a couple of weeks, like maybe like 3 weeks, at least since the meteor landed, because Waldreg says something like, you know, did you see it in the skies a couple weeks ago? So it really can't have been that long unless they had started the tower beforehand, and maybe there was some scenes that they did put in the show that ended up getting cut, because it does feel kind of confusing, like they maybe forgot to mention a couple of things.
Right. By the way, we got started on this thing, and it's going well.
They forgot to throw that into, you know, the beginning of episode 3 or something.
Yeah. Well, and they're tying a lot of storylines through, and so, you know, like this episode, we had nothing about the Harfoots, which is a whole storyline that we went an episode without, and you know, we'll have to have it back next, which means something's going to be gone. I want to find out who Meteor Man is, darn it.
Yeah, that's about it.
Well, if we saw the teaser, I don't know if we want to get there yet, but the teaser does indicate that we're seeing some Harfoots, and I think I said it last week. There's Chekhov's warg appears to be looming. So,
oh, there you go.
It makes sense because we didn't see any dwarves in episode 3, so we had a lot of dwarves in 4, and I'm sure we'll go back to the Harfoots next week.
And it's possible we'll be missing out on Numenor's story next week. I'm not sure. Like I could see us missing that one, and then going the rest of the things, because
I hope not. I want to see the marshaling of Numenor to Middle Earth. That just sounds pretty pretty epic.
That would be pretty neat. Yeah.
Stocking the ships and seeing the fleet, you know, sail.
So we also get the sense here that we know now that the I'm jumping ahead of myself here. We get this scene with Galadriel and Halbrand where they talk about he kind of flips the warlike stance that she took, where, you know, the armor that he wasn't wearing was weighing heavily on him, and kind of flips it on his head, where it's like you're too concerned with war. You need to actually like chill out and figure out, you know, how to talk to people without fighting trolls all the time. And then Galadriel takes a more calm tone with Muriel, and Muriel reveals to her the Palantir, and she gets to see the vision, which I love the cut on that scene. It was amazing, the special effect that they do where the block or the Palantir kind of breaks and then shatters, and then reality shatters her into the dream. And But in the room the Palantir is, we got to talk about the nerd room because I was geeking out about maybe Narsil has been revealed. Narsil has definitely been revealed now. When they first walk into this room with the Palantir, Galadriel stops right beside a sword that is clearly Narsil. At least the hilt of it is showing very clearly right there, and it looks just like the one from the movies. But there were some other things in this room. So what did you notice, Thomas?
I saw what has to be Dramborleg, the Axe of Tuor, who was a man who lived in Gondolin in the first age. I think we also see his shield. And then in the shadows, there's something that might be the dragon helm of Dorlomin, which the man Turin, son of Turambar, had also in the first age. So a lot of first age, like, huge orc killing weapons, like all in this room.
This is just the room of things that they put in the show just for us.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. And we get this really good discussion between the two of them. And again, more very Tolkien-esque lines that I loved, where Galadriel confronts Muriel's trying to get her on board with the combat to go and help Halbrand and his people. And she says to her, choose not the path of fear, but of faith. And that's such a good, powerful line, very Tolkien thing to say. And then Muriel comes back with an excellent counter, which is faith may bind one heart, but it's too fine a thread on which to hang a kingdom. And I love that interchange between the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, did anyone else catch how much this scene was reminiscent in both how it was set up and in dialogue to Galadriel showing Frodo her mirror? Mm-hmm. There's even a line of dialogue that's almost exactly the same. I think Galadriel says, like, a Palantir shows you many things, not all of which come to pass, which is taken straight from the Lothlorien scene from, I think, both the books and the Peter Jackson movies. But
I hadn't thought about that. That's really good.
Yeah,
I
thought
catch.
that I'm like, that was very clever sort of foreshadowing to like her own future.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that I thought was interesting here, and this is something that I think we're going to get more of, is you'll notice at the end of last episode, this is the room to which Muriel goes and she's speaking with someone and says the elf has come, or the time has come and the elf is here. It's not her father's room, because they go from her father's room to this room, and that same walking up the stairs and placing the lantern on the hook occurred at the end of last episode. So I'm intrigued to see if maybe she was using the Palantir to communicate with someone.
Then I guess she would have been lying when she said that the other 6 are missing.
Mm-hmm.
If she was, because then she would know at least where one of them is. Right.
So I am very suspicious of Muriel at this point. that threw me, because I was in, when Galadriel breaks into the king's room, I was like, okay, she must be at the top of those stairs. But then they walk to the top of the stairs and hang the lantern there. I'm like, oh, this is.
Did anyone also notice how she just like somehow scaled that tower and then breaks through the glass of the window? In a dress. That part, I was like, wait a second. What?
Well, we saw her climb in the first episode, so I guess it's a little bit easier than scaling a mountain, icy mountain wall.
Yeah, that's true. Does she have her dagger?
I can only imagine how good dwarves must be at this. If elves are that good, and then the dwarves can do it just that much better.
That part, yeah, I was just like, man, okay, Galadriel, let's just break everything in Numenor. Like, okay.
So last couple of things that I think we touched on most of the rest of the episode, but then there's we get a name for the tower where all the humans are, and it's Ostirith is what it was. So this is a location that I'm not particularly sure where it is to fit into everything, but maybe it's something that doesn't exist in the Third Age for us to have a reference back to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know a few Elvish words. I think that might mean something like Citadel Tower. Because I think Os means fortress and Tirith definitely means tower. So it might mean like fortress tower or something.
Did you also notice when Bronwyn was talking about how many villagers had come to the tower? She said there's people coming all the way from Aradruin, which I've always heard it Oradruin.
Yeah.
So hearing it emphasized in a different way, I was like, wait a second, what did she just say? That was a really exciting. I think I yelled out loud and everyone started laughing at me because I was like, guys, what?
But that's an actual location.
Right. We already kind of knew where we were. But when she said that, I was just like, that was a big moment. I was like, no way.
Yeah, I didn't catch it at first. I think one of the recurring problems in this show is that one of the things that they've picked up from the Peter Jackson films that they really shouldn't have is that a lot of characters mumble or slur their lines, and it makes it difficult for them to understand.
This is the kind of show that you have to have the subtitles on.
Yeah.
I don't think I could understand half of the Harfoots without the subtitles.
I'm going to start turning it on for my first watch through with my family and then maybe turn it off. I don't know, because I take my notes on my second watch. So I don't know. Maybe I'll just keep the captions on for the whole time from now on.
Yeah, I just always have them on.
My problem is that I tend to read the captions instead of watching the show. So I got to be careful.
Yeah.
So my last thing that I noticed in this one was the white tree when they put Galadriel out on the boat and she's going out into the bay. The white tree begins dropping its petals, and that's what sort of triggers the switch that Muriel brings her back in and says we're going to go to Middle Earth with her. And I'm wondering about this because we know what happens, which is essentially that they go to Middle Earth, they establish some forward bases, and while there, Pharazôn discovers that Sauron is calling himself the Lord of the Earth, becomes jealous of that name, and then that's where Numenor really just plummets off the edge, right? So I'm intrigued here because this decision, reading the petals of the tree, this decision is one of those a man often meets his fate on the road he tries to take to avoid it kind of things. So she's getting this notification from the tree that sending Galadriel off is causing the death of Numenor, and then she brings her back and actually goes to that end, to try and avoid the end of Numenor, takes them to the precipice. So I'm interested in what exactly is happening here, lore-wise, and where they're gonna go back to explain that.
I'm also kind of wondering what Pharazôn is up to because he seems very supportive of Muriel, and so I almost wonder if while she's gone, he's going to use it as an opportunity to kind of informally assume control. And then maybe, I'm guessing her father will probably die while she's gone. And then he'll kind of just take over while she's gone. Because I kind of feel like they might be trying to avoid the story that we know from the books where he forces her to marry him to assume control. So I wonder if they're kind of taking it in a slightly different direction. Because he doesn't seem to mind that she's suddenly on the side of the elves, which kind of seems to contradict the way he's been acting before. So maybe he's going to use it as some kind of opportunity.
Yeah, I also wonder if this is kind of just the beginning of Numenor's slide into tyranny. Because I know in some of the source material, it kind of shows how Numenor developed sort of colonial dependencies, kind of colonial states in Middle Earth. So I'm wondering, they're coming in to ostensibly help these Southlanders, but maybe they just don't leave. Maybe they just say, hey, we can occupy this land permanently and kind of exploit these people. And that will kind of be sort of the beginning of Numenor maybe falling from nobility into a kind of tyrannical colonial regime.
Yeah, that would be really cool to see for sure.
And maybe Pharazôn kills the king.
Oh.
While if Muriel's kind of the one who's kind of protecting him, because presumably Pharazôn, he sounds like he has a lot of the the people on his side. There might be I'm sure there's some loyal guards to the royal family. But if a lot of them go with Mariel to Middle Earth, then maybe it's Farazan takes this opportunity, and the king is old anyway, so no one's going to suspect. If an old man passes away in his sleep, so I don't know. I'm kind of wondering right now if Farazan he's not. Maybe he does have in his own mind has good intentions and is not actually trying to be an evil, the guy we know him that he'll become. So we could kind of see him starting off. He could be a very, positive character for Numenor, but he ends up through influence of a certain, captive they bring back to then kind of backslide into, being evil. Or then again, like I said, he could, if he kills the king, then we know he's probably not a good guy. So,
Well, he just seems like the kind of guy who will do anything for Numenor and for what he thinks is right. And what he thinks is right may not necessarily actually be what's truly right, but he does seem to really think that whatever he's doing is the right choice, and he's willing to get it done at any cost, it seems. I'm sure we'll see that as we go on.
Yeah, that's definitely a Tolkien, theme of being prideful and, being, because the whole Feanor was prideful, Morgoth or Melkor was prideful, and led to their falls and the falls of many. So definitely would be on brand for Tolkien if for Farazan to kind of start off being very prideful and then not being, not pulling back when he should, and taking a step too far and like I said, being under the influence of a certain captive they eventually get. So,
and even just to getting to that point where he is weak and succumbing the way that the king is, and that becomes more and more, Sauron. It's that moment of Wormtongue whispering in the ear of the king. It's the same way you would have this sort of Anatar whispering in the ear of Farazan as he becomes weaker and weaker, and then he wants to pursue immortality. I think the show has a lot of breathing room, and they've done a good job of establishing the early parts of it. They can pace it too. That's the really neat thing. I think they've done a good job of setting up a lot of the different storylines. Now they can ride on just slowly building all of the things that they've set up in these first few episodes. So I like it. I think it's taking a good turn. I'm enjoying this ride of the show. It was disorienting at first to figure out where we were, and to kind of adjust my mindset to this is not exactly Tolkien, but it's very fun, and it's kind of a exciting ride. All right. Any closing thoughts?
Just that I'm excited. Yeah, like what Kaitlyn said. I'm just excited to see where it goes. I'm sort of letting them take the driver's seat, and I'm along for the ride until it's over. I'm, like I said, I think at the top of the show, I'm just fascinated by the sense that we kind of know where it's going, but we don't know the details. And I'm just really excited to see it all unfold.
All right, so that is it from us. We'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Middle-earth, including Gary J., Christopher P., Thomas V., Jody F., and Brian S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Middle-earth and all the shows here at StarQuest. You can join them at sqpn.com/give. We'd love to hear what you think of this episode of The Rings of Power. You can let us know at sqpn.com/middle-earth on our Facebook page or Twitter, or send an email to middleearth@sqpn.com. You can also visit our channel on StarQuest Discord server at starquest.com/discord. There's a lot of great discussion going on there. A lot of meme sharing also about some of the things that are happening on the show. So if you are interested in having a more in-depth discussion that kind of progresses as we're going through, definitely join us there. We'll be back next time when we are discussing episode 5 of The Rings of Power. Until then, Jeff Haecker, thank you for joining me on sharing the Secrets of Middle-earth.
Thank you, Thomas.
And Kaitlyn Facista, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. This was great.
And Thomas Salerno, thank you as well.
Thanks so much.
Once again, I'm Thomas Sanjurjo. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Technology. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/technology.